Welcome back to another episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. I'm your host, MommaFoxFire, and today I have an incredibly insightful and important conversation lined up for you. In this episode, we delve deep into the world of trauma therapy, resilience building, and some of the challenges faced by first responders and trauma therapists. Our guest today is Colleen Clark, a seasoned trauma therapist with a passion for supporting those who have experienced trauma firsthand. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table, particularly when it comes to working with first responders. As we explore the complexities of managing the toll of trauma, her insights shed light on techniques for recognizing burnout, building resilience, and embracing mental wellness. We uncover misconceptions about mental health. We talk about the unique challenges faced by first responders, and we talk about practical strategies for fostering healing and strength. Whether you're a first responder, a trauma therapist, or someone just seeking to understand the world of trauma better or support a loved one who is in one of those roles, this episode promises to be a source of inspiration, knowledge, and compassionate guidance. Before we jump into the heart of our discussion, a quick reminder to our listeners: if you enjoy the content of this podcast and you find value in these conversations, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. Your engagement and support helps me reach a wider audience and continue producing meaningful episodes like this one. Now let's jump right into our conversation with Colleen Clark on Even Tacos Fall Apart. It looks like it did. That is excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Mental Health Monday. I am so excited to address our topic tonight because it is one that is near and dear to my heart. My dad is a retired fireman. My grandfather was a retired fireman, and we have lots of other first responders in our family and everything. So tonight we're going to be talking about trauma's toll on first responders and trauma therapists. And our guest tonight is Colleen Clark. I do have a question queue open. If you have any questions for Colleen, feel free to type !Q, follow it with your question, pop it into the chat, and we'll make sure to ask it while we're live here. A little bit about Colleen. Colleen became a social worker in 1985, a clinical social worker in 1992, and has been in clinical private practice since 1994. She brings an inherent wisdom and depth of healing for children, youth, teens, adults, couples, and families she has the honor to work with on their journey through healing to wholeness. She brought accelerated resolution therapy, or ART, to Canada in 2014 and has since trained more than 1,200 therapists from coast to coast to coast. She is a master art practitioner, clinical art specialist, ACSW clinical supervisor, RCRR lead certified art trainer, Canada. She is also a diplomat with the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, is board certified in bereavement trauma and sexual abuse trauma, has presented her work nationally and internationally, and has been a sessional instructor at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Social Work. So Colleen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for our topic. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Great. Well, I'm super excited to be here too. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we've got, I think, just a little bit of a delay, but it's all good. We're going to work with it. We do already have a community question. Bite Mark is here, and she has a question for you. Her question is, what is your favorite poem?
Oh, well, my favorite poem is by John Lennon, and it's actually a song, Imagine.
Oh, I love that.
That's been my mantra forever. And a lot of my book is dedicated to John Lennon because I really see that, we might be dreamers, but we're not the only one. And I really believe that we can come from a place of healing and peace in this world. So John Lennon, Imagine 100% is my mantra. I like Rumi too.
Yeah, Rumi's really good. I love that song by John Lennon. It's wonderful. My kids love it too. Like it comes on and they sing it and everything. It's really cute. And I love it whenever they get into songs like that, stuff that's not today's music necessarily, but has really good messaging.
100%. And Julian Lennon did a lovely rendition of Imagine a couple of years ago. And it's really lovely to listen to also. So yeah.
Oh, I'll have to look up that one. I actually haven't listened to that one, so that's really cool. Well, Colleen, can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us a little more about your experiences and what made you become interested in specializing in mental health?
Well, it's a long journey. So I'll just say I'm very spiritual to start. And as I'm an adopted person, and when I was about in grade 8, is one of those questions of what are you going to do when you get into high school? What are you going to do when you graduate? And I always wanted to be a social worker. And the messaging that I got at that time was, you're too emotional. You can't be a social worker. So I
Oh,
got that message from the family that I was raised in. So long story, I volunteered a lot in the community with as a mom with my girls, etc. And I went through a divorce when I was 27, and that's when I actually had the opportunity. I volunteered at the school for my girls, and I became a teacher's aide. So it was a really nice bridge year for me to decide I'm going to university to be a teacher or to be a social worker. And what happened very, very quickly, I was in kindergarten with the 5-year-olds, and I was the one, how come so-and-so isn't having breakfast? Or how come
mm,
maybe they don't have the clothes that they need when it's really cold in the winters that we have up in Canada and Calgary. So it became really, really clear that I looked at not just the child, but all the environment. So I said, well, guess what? I'm going to apply to Mount Royal College at that time and went back to college at 27 as a single mom, student loans and everything. And I felt like I was the home of the first class when we went through the code of ethics. And I always remember sitting there and just had tears running down my face about, well, the code of ethics as a social worker, and I was home. So
hmm
I haven't looked back, and that was 1983, September of 1983. And I'll
Wow.
always remember joining when I went to college, because I was a single parent. I was 27, and this professor said, if you think you're going to be an A student, you'll be an A student. If you think you'll be a B student, you will, C, D, F. And I said, dang it, I'm going to be an A student. So I graduated 3.96, got full scholarships, complete my bachelor's, and then went back and obtained my master's degree a few years later. So yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
and my first job is actually as a child welfare investigator in Calgary,
Mm,
and protecting children. And what I really loved about that job was I had an incredible ability to connect to the parents, so I could have conversations and not be threatening with them. And that's where I really got connected about what are the root causes
mm.
for behaviors and looking at not just symptoms, but let's see if we can actually get to what the root cause of maybe the anger or the dysfunction. And because I really believe that people love their kids, but sometimes they don't have the resources themselves in their life experiences. So that was my first job in social work.
Yeah. I cannot imagine A, being a teacher, but B, being told like you're too emotional to help people. That's
Yes,
something
I know.
that's just
Well,
wild.
well, well, I found out very early that being adopted, my temperament was different than the family that I was raised in, adopted into. And years later, I did meet my birth family, my birth mother, etc. And she was a classical pianist, and I just very creative, very expressive, and everything. So that was one of those aha moments for me when I was 37, saying, "Yeah, I did come from a family where I did fit."
Yeah.
So that was really reaffirming for me too.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. What is your favorite thing about working in the mental health field, and what are some of the biggest challenges for you?
So, what are the biggest, I guess, motivations that I have to
Yeah.
work in the area of mental health? Well, I really see hope, and I think it because of my experiences and working with thousands of people, close to 40 years now, that I'm a hope carrier. And I
like
think
that.
that's the biggest thing. Because when people have gone through so many difficulties and they are feeling hopeless and that they can't see any light at the end of the tunnel, or that there is a tunnel anywhere, I am very able to join where they're at. But I'll also let them know that I'm going to be with them as they go through this journey of healing. And I do give them hope with that because of the different ways that I'm trained as a trauma therapist, as a clinical social worker, but also as a human being, because part of it, I think, is to bear witness and to not take on people's issues, but to be with and to commit to being with them through as they go through that self-discovery experience within self, which I think is so important. So I'm a hope carrier, and that's what I would say most of anything. I've got amazing skills and tools, but it's the ability to connect as a human being, as to a human being. Whatever our differences are, we have incredible similarities. So
yeah. I love the term hope carrier. I think that's a really,
did you want to know about challenges?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you ask about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think challenges can sometimes be coming from maybe a systems perspective, different organizations, where maybe not all organizations in mental health are trauma informed yet. But I can say, I don't know in the States, but I know in Canada, there's a huge shift, a paradigm shift into trauma informed practice. So I think that can be a challenge if systems are still operating more from more of a traditional perspective, more from a symptomology perspective instead of a trauma informed. But as an educator, I developed the first ever trauma mental health course in the Faculty of Social Work and taught that to undergraduates for about 7 years until I stepped down about 4 years ago doing all the other work I'm doing. But I'm also, as an educator, it's about giving information to organizations and giving them information to share. So for me, it's a joining with and not looking at what the differences are, but to give information, right? And talk about, with mental health, if we treat the individual as a whole individual, and if we stop looking at symptoms and treating symptoms and really look at trauma as the root cause, then we can normalize that people should have these symptoms based on what they've gone through. So it's a really paradigm shift, not only for clients, not only for professionals that I train or professionals that I've taught, but within organizations. Like, we need to come from a trauma-informed lens of practice. So I really, really hold on to that.
Yeah.
Dearly.
And can you explain to us what that means? What is a trauma-informed lens versus treating symptoms and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think, if we look at as human beings, and trauma is very simply identified and defined as any potential life-threatening event, physically, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, or psychologically. And also we think about it too, when we think about environmental trauma, goodness sakes, with COVID, when we look at disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, and everything like that, we each will have our own individual response to a situation. So what I might find traumatic, you might not. It doesn't matter, but it's based on your experience. So once we can start really identifying that perspective, then it's going to start normalizing. You should have symptoms of avoidance or anxiety or depression or OCD or addictions and all these different factors, or eating disorders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we look at the root cause, and if we start explaining from a physiological perspective that the brain and the body is going to have those responses of that fight flight, right, that hyperarousal, or freeze response, hypoarousal, and understanding how we get triggered through what our amygdala, through our senses, and to really give that information to the people that we work with, it normalizes. It's a quick turnaround about like, oh, I should have these symptoms. Absolutely, you should. That would be a normal response based on your situation. And then what happens is people start seeing like, oh, so I am treatable. Absolutely, you are. So it takes away almost like that I'm the problem versus I should have these behaviors or these symptoms based on I haven't been able to process what this trauma has had. And it manifests over time and over years that a lot of the addictions, they become what you look at as the primary issue. But if we look at what the root cause is, I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that explanation. I think that I mean, it makes sense, right? Because if you're going through something traumatic or you've been through something traumatic and you're having all of these responses and it's easy to, I mean, just like with some sort of illness that the doctor doesn't know what it is, it's easy to treat the symptom and just say, well, your nose is stopped up, you need to take a decongestant. Well, if your nose is stopped up and it's not related to allergies, you know, it's a different underlying cause. So I think it's great that people are starting to look at it that way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So that's where I come from, is a very strong trauma-informed lens of practice.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have a serial killer or true crime story that fascinates you?
When I looked at your question, it's quite interesting. So I've watched a lot of let's say, whether it's Dahmer, whether, you know, it's some of the serial killers. My brain always goes to, I wonder what their story was.
Yeah.
I wonder what their earlier life was. So do I have one in particular? No. But coming from a therapist perspective, I want to know what happened to them.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's where I come from. I'm not of judgment. You know, I don't know all their stories or anything like that, but I would be very curious what happened to them growing up. Was it an attachment wound? How were they hurt? You know, what happened to them? So that's, I would want to do a postmortem about their early life and what happened.
Yeah.
And also their parents' lives, right? What happened to their parents, or intergenerational trauma, as we know, right? So, yeah.
That's something that I think is,
what I would say.
I think that that's really cool. Just the ability that we have now to know more about someone's life and say, well, look at all the stuff that this person went through when they were a kid or when they were young or in their formative years, or, you know, a lot of the time it's that they had a head injury at a very young age. Well, now we're able to kind of do all these studies and everything. I think that it's so neat to be able to put it into that context and say, like, yeah, they went through some shit, you know? So not that excuses the behavior, but
no, not at all. But I think it'd be very fascinating. If somebody did a study, maybe people have done a study about that, right? But I'm always curious when I'm watching them, you know, or if I'm working with first responders and I hear stories sometimes, right? I wonder what happened to the perpetrator, right? So, you know, that's where I go. I've trained a lot of therapists working with the penitentiaries, and one of the therapies that I brought into Canada, accelerated resolution therapy, they're using it a lot to help the inmates actually go back and work through their complex trauma and growing up and everything like that. So, you know, to me, it's that place of hope too, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't have a favorite one.
Yeah, that's okay.
I have a place of curiosity. What happened intergenerational to them?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that was a great segue into our topic tonight, because we're going to be talking about first responders and trauma therapists and the toll that trauma and dealing with trauma takes on them. So how does repeated exposure to trauma affect the mental and emotional well-being of first responders and trauma therapists? And what are some of the common things that they might experience?
Well, I think what happens with first responders, whether, let's say, they're police, RCMP, military, firefighters, EMS, or whatever, quite often what can happen, and this is not going to be a surprise, probably even for your family, people numb out.
Mm-hmm.
They have to actually have what we call numbing, which is hypoarousal. And quite often, part of the training would be that desensitization. That when they go to a call, they have to go into that fight response, but that numbing ability in order to do what they need to do. And I think what happens repetitively over time, or it could be just one incident also, people can numb out, and they do numb out, and it's just not at work. And what will happen over time, it will generalize that numbing to all aspects of their life, and to their personal relationships, to their family, their friends. And there's something that can happen called PTSD. Quite often that can be very common with first responders. And one of the biggest factors with PTSD is avoidance. And so they will actually start avoiding, and through the numbing behavior, because they want to keep themselves off of that event, and
Right.
actually start looking at behaviors, whether it's the addictions, whether it's, drinking, pornography, sexual addictions, spending, gambling, going through a lot of, let's say, risk-taking behaviors, so a lot of numbing out behavior. And it could just be sitting downstairs watching TV, being completely disconnected from family and friends, right? So it's all of a sudden their world becomes very small.
Yeah.
And they feel nothing. And to me, that's a huge piece of when I'm working with a first responder, where I'm going to be explaining, I wouldn't be surprised if how you've been able to cope is you feel nothing anymore. And quite often it's like, how did you know? Because you should feel nothing based on what you've been exposed to, for whether it's one incident you've gone to, or if you've been a member for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
Because it's functional. Because if you felt every time you do that, you could not keep doing what you're doing. So I would say it would be the numbing and avoidant behavior. And at the same time, there's a huge shift in Canada, and I hope in the States too, to normalize, like I say, that trauma lens perspective, because there's a lot of shame for people to come to that place of, I've got a problem. And when you're a first responder, you're supposed to fix problems. And there can be a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And one of the hardest things when somebody would come to a clinic that I work just very part-time at now, I will say to them, probably your most difficult, courageous thing you've ever done is walk through the doors of this clinic to acknowledge that things are not going the way you thought they were going to go.
Yeah.
So I talk about that a lot. Yeah. And I think if you're talking about trauma therapists, it's hearing stories over and over and over again, because part of some of the different trauma therapies is vicarious traumatization, that therapists have to keep hearing these stories. So if you're seeing maybe 4 clients for 90-minute sessions a day, and you have to listen to the stories, it can also impact a therapist also very personally too, where they start withdrawing, or they don't want to go out to do the things that they would normally maybe do, right? So it can be a very similar, somewhat dynamic, right? That can happen, for sure. Yeah, so I would say the vicarious traumatization can be a risk for therapists if they do traditional therapies, where you have to hear the story.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, like I said, my dad is a retired fireman. I remember as a kid, there would be obviously not every shift that he came back, but he did like 24 on, 48 off. So there were some shifts he would come back, he would come home and he would just like hug. I have 2 sisters, and he would hug us and like, I love you so much. And now, not that he was not, because he was always very loving and everything, but there are some things looking back now that I'm like, he must have been on a really bad call, and come off of that shift. And it was just really hard. And so I know that I'm sure he had to do a lot of numbing. I should ask him if he wants to come on and talk about his experience, actually. But yeah, it's one of those things that I just you don't realize whenever you aren't on that side. There's no way to know what people are going through when they have to go to a bad car crash involving kids or something. Or if you're a police officer, you have to go on a domestic violence call or something and deal with that. And then trauma therapists, you're right, having to hear all of these stories over and over. I don't think very many people consider that.
No, fair enough, right? And I also think, you made a really important point too, is quite often what I found is, let's say that a first responder, whether male or female, or, how they identify, if they also have children at the same age, let's say a child was, hurt or killed or murdered or whatever, or died or suicide, that also can be a lot about transference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And about the impact about that, for sure. So I know when I was in child welfare, and my kids were very little at that time, they were like 2 and 6, I think, and you would go home and you go like, wow, we are so lucky, right? But at the same time, it can start skewing your world. So I think that's also another part too, is quite often what can happen, people, whether they're, I believe, first responders or just human beings or therapists, whatever, because we all are basically made of the same makeup, is our cognitions can start shifting. So when you start going, you want to be a first responder, I want to help people. So your values are of helping and of serving, right? The same with social workers or therapists or whatever. And then slowly over time, you're working with an X% of the population, and that becomes more the norm of 90% of my world.
Mm-hmm.
Is I'm working with really difficulties instead of seeing it this way, right? So there can be a skewing, and that's why balance and self-care are critical, whether you're first responders, therapists. And it's interesting because when I was teaching at the Faculty of Social Work, and when I'm doing my trainings with accelerated resolution therapy, I identify with everybody, whether it's psychiatrists, social workers, psychologists, clinical nurse specialists. We are all first responders in this room to normalize, right? Because we are bearing witness to people suffering. And just like first responders, that is what they do also.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad that you brought up self-care, because your people dedicate, first responders, trauma therapists, they dedicate their lives to helping others. And then it's easy to neglect your own self-care. First of all, I neglect my own self-care, and I am not a first responder. So it's easy for me to do. It's got to be even easier for a first responder or trauma therapist to neglect self-care in kind of the light of, oh, I want to help other people. So how critical is self-care in mitigating the toll of trauma? And what are some effective self-care strategies that you would recommend?
Well, I think as a therapist, it's critical also that you do consultation with other therapists, right? Or that you do see somebody that you can do your own processing with. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an ethical responsibility, right? I think it's really important on a regular basis to do checking in with someone, a professional yourself. I also think self-reflection is really important. The book I just wrote about accelerated resolution therapy, what you do before, I've got a whole bunch of self-reflective questions for therapists. So I think for us, it's our responsibility to self-reflect also. We get our clients to do that. We are also responsible to do our own self-reflection. So how was my day? What went okay? What didn't? Did something trigger me? What am I going to do with that? Do I need to go talk to somebody? So I think that's a critical component, with that. I also think it's really important and when I'm working with trauma, PTSD with people, I will say that PTSD can go in remission, but you have to do your balanced self-care. And also with therapists, I really believe that you need to be balanced, physically, mentally, spiritually, in all aspects of our life. where, you do take time to have fun. You do have hobbies, or, do you go for walks in nature? Do you do mindfulness, self-compassion? For myself, I garden. I have my dogs. I have my family. I'll go for walks. Right now I'm in beautiful Waterton with my daughter and granddaughter for our long weekend. It's our Canada Day up here, to be in the mountains and to be connected and just to sit and hold rocks. And, I think eating well is important. Meditation, I work hard, but I also relax and reflect really well. I have a hammock in my backyard with my fountain where I'll get in that and I'll swing with the dogs. Laugh. I think, what do you like? What gives you passion? And I think that's an important component. What did give you passion before? And know that you can get back there. And it doesn't mean you have to jump in full heart, but take little steps and to really ask yourself the question. I ask my clients this all the time, and I ask myself this all the time too. What gives you energy and what takes energy away from you? Is it relationships? Where do you feel like, yes, I'm excited? And what takes it away? And to actually starting writing a little journal about that and to explore maybe some new things, right? Whether it's cooking or having friends over. I have fresh flowers in my house all the time, or I use, essential oils, or laughter. Laughter is huge. So I think that's important. And music and, dance. Just actually yesterday morning, I'm dancing like a wild woman in my living room with the dogs, right? So it's I think it's about balance. Bike riding, sports, and because it's important. And I think, years ago I used to be the director in palliative hospice, and life goes fast for us all. And for me, one of the most important things is to live like you're dying, because we are, and to have no regrets. But at the same time, to do the work, because people can heal and they can get through difficulties, and there can be hope, and you don't have to carry it by yourself. And I think that's important. Support groups, connections, and when I've worked with a lot of first responders, quite often I'll have the partner will come in maybe the next session, and I'll just say, so what's it been like on you? And I'll talk about what they should be experiencing, because we're in systems. We're not just in isolation, and everything has a cause and effect. So, very often they need to also get some support and some help with that too, to normalize when you're living in a traumatic situation with somebody who is cut off or angry or drinking or whatever that they're doing for the avoidance. What is that like on the children, but on the spouse, on everybody, on a whole family system level? So, yeah.
Yeah. So kind of whatever works for that individual, self-care wise, it sounds like that's what you got to do. But you got to find something.
And brainstorm it. Yeah, we'll brainstorm it. And it doesn't mean, I think that's the cool thing about life, right? If it didn't work the first time, do something different.
Yeah.
We've got choice, we don't have to be staying in a rut. So try something that you haven't done, just for fun. Do some watercolors, or I don't know, whatever, get that ball out, or, go rafting, or, get your old music out, or whatever you want to do. But you don't need to get stuck, with that, for sure.
I would say also, if you've tried something and it didn't work for you, and I'll use journaling and meditation are the two examples that I have, that when I first tried journaling, it did not work for me. And I have a wonderful therapist, and she was like, here's why it's not working for you, because you go back and you read the shit that you wrote, and you don't need to do that because it's not healthy for you. No. And you'll sit there and you'll just read and read and read. So she said, I want you to journal. Yeah. And then if you're journaling on a computer, delete it. Don't save it as a draft, just delete it. If you're journaling in a notebook here, then rip the page out, throw it away, burn it if you need to, whatever it is. And since she gave me that advice, it was just one of those things that was like, oh, now it works for me because I can get it out and then I have to delete it or throw it away or whatever. And that works for me. But I thought that journaling just wasn't the thing for me. And it wasn't the journaling wasn't for me. I was just not doing it in a way that was supportive for myself. So if something doesn't work, try it in a different way.
Absolutely. And find out, what is your truth, right? And what will for you. And if it doesn't, like you say, figure out a way that it can, right? And not everybody wants to journal, like
Absolutely.
just on that, right?
Yeah.
Quite often, and that's okay. So, don't. I work, with some big 6-foot people. And when I say, you might want to try journaling. Are you crazy, Colleen? I'm not journaling at all, right? So that's okay. You don't have to, right? But then maybe go for a 15-minute walk each day to get you out of the house, to notice the differences, or, take that basketball and just hit some baskets or whatever you want to do for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to talk about something that you mentioned because you brought up that trauma can impact personal relationships and kind of support networks and everything. So how can first responders and trauma therapists navigate the strain that trauma can place on their relationships, both personal and professional?
Well, I think psychoeducation is critical. And, when I'm first meeting with somebody, I'm not going to be doing trauma work the first session. Let me tell you, I'm going to be providing them a lot of psychoeducation about the different evidence-based trauma therapies that they can choose. I have a bias to accelerated resolution therapy, but I'm trained in all of them. And also then I'm going to give psychoeducation about just what we talked about, the trauma-informed practice, about from a physiological level, what happens to the brain, the body about trauma. But then I'm going to talk about the impact trauma has on that individual, but also on the family, the systems that they are connected with. And quite often people, let's say first responder, let's say with firefighter, for example, they are so close. They're very similar to the military because they're in a unit together. So they go to a fire and then they come back, right? Very similar like the military, or whatever. But I'll say, and sometimes have you noticed that you start disconnecting or you start withdrawing from, your troop or whatever, to sort of be aware of the differences. And quite often they happen very slowly and gradually. And I'll talk about, what happens within family systems, with relationships. Maybe it's intimacy. Maybe it's, no, I don't want to go to the farmer's market with you guys this weekend, or no, I don't want to go on holidays. And to notice when they're starting to withdraw, but then maybe notice the impact it's having on their partner or on the children. So I think psychoeducation is a critical component to normalize that they're not just going to be in isolation. It's like that ripple effect, it's like the stone in the pond, but whoever they're connected with, it's going to happen. And, you just even think about driving, road rage, all of a sudden like, I'm angry, and notice the difference in your driver, or the grocery person, you're upset. So just noticing that your window of tolerance, you don't have much wiggle room because of all of that anger that you're holding in, or that irritability.
Yeah. I'm sure there's
and I'll quite often
go ahead.
No, and like I was saying, and quite often I will ask their partner to come into the session. And so I can get a sense of, what are the differences that you've noticed in your partner, right? How has it impacted you? And maybe getting them referred to see someone also. And then eventually, maybe they're going to do some emotionally focused couple therapy because they need to reconnect with that beautiful attachment work, that heart-centered work that I think emotionally focused couple work can do.
How often does a first responder or trauma therapist, is it common for them to seek out a trauma therapist or anything like that? Is it becoming more common? Like, is that kind of an upward trend? I would hope so, but how common is that?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's becoming what I think is very exciting, and it's not as stigmatized as it was. So I've been working with first responders basically since about 1994 in my private practice, and I was trained in EMDR at that time, and I get these calls from RCMP, first responders. Hey, Colleen, I hear that you're doing some of this EMDR work. Can I come and see you? So there was a lot of secrecy about it. And PTSD, that word, it's just like, I'm broken, I'm not ever going to be okay.
Right.
And what's happened over, I'd say, the last 20 years, at least the last 10, 13 for sure, there is a normalization. So the destigmatization, I think, is happening. And what I can say, it's about time, because you should have these symptoms. And also, I really come from this perspective, being a first responder, you have signed up, you've given your life, and you also have a right to be okay for the rest of your life. So I think mental health, mental wellness, and it can be very preventative if you can get in and let go of this cumulative that you've carried, or this maybe this one incident with an evidence-based trauma therapy. It's going to actually get you to sustain your life expectancy in your career, but also your life expectancy, I believe, from a place of being proactive for the rest of your life. So I've seen a huge piece of, and boundaries, and more first responders. And I'll just say it, sometimes the younger generation, I'm old now, but still got lots going on. They're putting boundaries down. And they're saying, no, I'm not going to be working 38 hours or 40 hours in a row. I need to go home to sleep, right? So I think there's some boundaries being put down, and because they do want to stay in their job, but also they want to live a life too. So I think that's important. And I think it's becoming more normalized. Yeah, you should have these symptoms, and we want you to, keep healthy and well. Everybody does.
Yeah. I'm really glad to hear that it's becoming more common for, because I know a lot of first responder jobs, especially being kind of a male dominated field, at least here, there is still a little bit of that stigmatism. And I really hope that is lifting a little bit, because it is so important. There's nothing wrong with getting some support to help you get through what you've witnessed or been through.
Well, we all need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
100%. And I think when we think we have to carry it all our own, that is scary. Because then I think you're not doing that self-reflection piece. And, I have my private practice in Calgary, and I would say a good 75% potentially is I work with professionals, whether they're doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, clinical social workers, to help them process what they need to process, right? So, and to me but also having a safe place for people to go to. So I think that's a huge piece for trauma therapists, is to develop that level of safety and to connect with people immediately, because, I've worked with so many detectives and stuff like that, and I'll say, I might be interviewing you, but I know you're interviewing me, at the same time, right? So I think that's important. I also think for working with first responders, they're very protective. And I'll say to them, my job is to hear what you need to tell me. I have my own supports and resources, so you don't need to protect me. And I think that's an important piece also, because they are protective and they don't want to cause you harm. So I think it's important for the therapist to be very open about that. Listen, this is my job, and I do see somebody that I can debrief, or I need to process whatever that's going to be. So you don't have to look after me, but thank you.
I like that, because I definitely have seen, like, first responders are very protective. That is a thing that they are. That is what they do. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bite Mark has a question, and she says, do you have any advice for encouraging first responders or similar folks to actually get therapy? Sometimes they're hard to convince.
Well, I would say, I think, when we think about, if you reframe it, so we think of therapy, it's sort of potentially got this mindset, well, you've got to be really messed up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if you flip it around and, you think about mental health, well, maybe we start talking about mental wellness, health and wellness, and that it's to help you maintain and sustain your wellness and your health over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, we all go to doctors for checkups. And to be honest, some of the organizations that I've worked with, I'll say what you should do after I've done work with people, or I'll suggest they should have a check-in once a year or once every 6 months. And if something comes up, it becomes proactive.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a normal thing of like going to the dentist or going for the medical or whatever. And quite often people are held in these jobs for years without even being checked in on, like in homicide or whatever. You have 400 homicides. Did anybody ask about how you're doing? No, because you're doing your job. So I think there should be more checks and balances in place, but to normalize and maybe shift it to health and wellness. And that it's part of being a human being. We feel, we think, and our brain and our body is going to respond to these traumatic events very similar, and that we know how we can work through them. And like I say, my therapy is ART that I use, accelerated resolution therapy, which is a very non-talkative therapy, which actually does prevent vicarious traumatization with therapists. So, yeah. So that's what I would do. I would normalize it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think treating it like a dentist. I have my older child is in therapy on a regular basis. And then my younger child is not in therapy, but I do a check-in with a therapist with him once a year to just say like, hey, I don't have anything specific for him to talk to you about, but can you just talk to him for an hour? And of course I, pay for the time and everything.
Exactly.
And it's just one of those things that he really likes going to therapy because the therapist that we use lets him play with clay. So that's, but it's one of those things, you never know what's going to come up if you just go and talk to somebody. I think that it's a great way to put it.
Exactly. And to normalize it, you're just going for a check-in.
Yep.
And, where can you really go? Friends are different. You have a different relationship with a friend. A therapeutic relationship is that the therapist's job is to hold space for you and respect your confidentiality unless there's risk of harm to self or others. Yeah. But where you can just be and hold into that sacred space and that you do feel safe. And to me, that's a critical place because let's face it, the world is not a safe place, maybe like it was, and that we all need a place that we can just say, I just need to see you.
Yeah.
And I have people that will follow up with me maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. Hey, just want to just pop in again just to sort of do a check in with you. How I'm
that's
doing.
Awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
So broadening that a little bit, how can someone who is not a first responder or trauma therapist be just in general, maybe outside of saying, encouraging therapy or encouraging well-being, how can someone be a supportive friend or family member to someone who is a first responder or trauma therapist?
I think that's a really good question. So when I was looking at those questions, I think to be really very transparent, I would say, I love you so much, but I've noticed some changes in you. I noticed that you're not coming to the ball games anymore. Are you okay? I noticed that you're not wanting to go for Thanksgiving. Are you okay? So I think noticing those differences, but in a loving, caring way, not a blaming way, what do you need, right? and to know that they're not alone. Because I think one of the biggest things is people can feel very alone, very isolated.
Absolutely.
And that they're the problem, and I think on some level, I really believe, and I practice mindfulness, self-compassion all the time, and to be very compassionate with your partner, yourself also. And to me, compassion is joining with suffering. It's different than empathy, but acknowledging, you have a very difficult job. And I want you to know, I'm here, I can't fix it, I can't change it. But maybe I can just hold you.
Yeah.
But is there anything I can do to support you, right? So I think one of the things, because people will actually try, I think, with trauma to push people away. They can, whether it's through anger, whether it's through addictions, whether it's through numbing out or whatever. And, I'm just recently working with somebody who had a very serious addiction issue. And I was having a conversation with them last week, and he goes, why did people give up on me when I had my addiction? I said, what did you need them to do that they didn't? I needed them to love me no matter what, not to accept my behavior, but not to give up on me, because now it's just all conditional. Now that I'm doing better, it's like, yeah, well, we're so proud of you now. Well, where were you when I wasn't doing well? So I think, however people can do that with boundaries, respectfully, and knowing what their limits also with some behaviors and everything. But I think to know that they're not alone, I think that's important, right? It could be just, a card maybe, or sending in the lunchbox or whatever. I love you, we miss you, or just acts of kindness, right? But also, I'm noticing you're a lot quieter. Like, what do you need? Do you need just half an hour before, you come up for dinner? Like, tell me how we can manage this together. So I think communication is really important. And it can also be nonverbal communication, like maybe a hug or maybe whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think asking,
not to give up.
And just asking people what they need and how you can help them, is one of those things that is so underused, I feel like, in almost all situations. It's so underused to ask someone, what do you need from me right now? Because or at least I'll put it into terms of myself. I always want to fix things for people. I'm like, you're having a problem, let me help. I can help you. Let me. But sometimes, especially like with my kids, sometimes they don't want you to help. Sometimes they just want you to listen. Or sometimes they do. They just want a hug or something like that. So asking how you can support someone is really underused, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think you really have underscored a critical piece, because I believe that too. And I think quite often we don't even know that we have needs. Right? You look at Maslow's hierarchy. But I think by asking that question, it can give the opening of a door that you have a right to have a need. And you might not know what you need right now, but to acknowledge that you do have needs. And I think that's a really good opening of a conversation, and that I'm here with you and for you.
Yep, absolutely. I know building resilience is a crucial skill or need for managing the toll of trauma. What are some resilience building techniques that first responders and trauma therapists can adopt to better cope with the challenges that they face on a regular basis?
Well, like, I think having that work-life balance is really important. That self-reflection, connecting with also their own safe people that they need to be well aware of, about when they're noticing if they're getting fatigued. Are they just tired, or are they feeling completely drained? So I think that self-awareness is a critical component for sure. Are they doing mindfulness, self-compassion? To me, that's an important skill and tool that, I'm trained in, and I teach my clients that I'm working with about mindfulness, self-compassion. exactly how to meet your needs, but also that attunement internally, within self. So I think that's an important resiliency component. I think noticing what's going on in your body constantly is really important. So what do you feel in your body right now? Did you just get triggered? So where do you feel that in your body? Then to do some breathing, or with, accelerated resolution therapy, I might do some soft use eye movements to manage that triggering that I might have in my body, or, to do grounding techniques. I think is really important, with that component. I think yoga is important. I think, anything body awareness, I think that's really trauma sensitive. Yoga is really important. Mindfulness is very important. I think it's taking time to make sure that you have time each day when you start your day. And I really think it's starting from a place of gratitude when you wake up in the day and throughout your day, and to see and really be mindful about your blessings and what you're grateful for. And when you end the day, is to identify, so what are you grateful for? Maybe it's not the easiest day, but what did you do during your day? Did you live your life to the fullest? And who are you thankful for? And what are you thankful for the people in your life, right? And your experiences. So I think that's important that I would look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like gratitude is something that can feel so kitschy. It's like people, you have to be thankful for stuff. But we've got in our Discord, we have a channel that's just called Attitude of Gratitude. And it pings a couple of times a week to just say, what are you thankful for? And sometimes it's like this big thing happened and everybody's really thankful for it. And then sometimes it's just small things like, I'm thankful that I got to cook dinner with my kids. Like, it's just a little thing.
Right.
It doesn't have to be groundbreaking for you to be grateful for it.
Yeah. And I think I have an 11-year-old granddaughter, and she's probably the kindest young person, very old soul. And, just talking with her driving down here today, and she'll just say, Nana, that was so kind. So I think, to acknowledge the kindness. And how many times, right, we're in a grocery lineup and somebody's kind of grumpy or whatever. You might be feeling kind of grumpy yourself too, because jeepers, you're late, you got it, da, 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 da. But if you can just sort of just change that and put on a smile and say, hi, how was your day? It's going to change your day. And I think there's this reciprocal thing that we have as human beings that we want to give to others, and to be kind and generous instead of cranky and miserable and mean. And then you start seeing things change and you go like, well, wasn't that fun? Or, paying for somebody in Walmart at Christmas that they might not have the money, or in Starbucks, or something fun. And that just changes, like just something, you change the energy around you. And I think that's really important. And I think listening to music is really important too, or your animals, right? Or just smelling a bird, right? Or smelling a flower, all that stuff.
Yeah. Now he's going to be mad at me that I started petting him and didn't keep going, but yes, yeah, well, we love animals here for sure. That's one of those things that
for sure. Well, yeah, for sure. And I think, also if we do stuff with our senses, right? About what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we feel. So many of first responder or whatever, do something with your hands, build something, get in the garden, do something organic, pick up some wool and knit, or do something. And that feels really good. Or, clean out that drawer that you've been avoiding. It's those little things. Do little tiny things each day, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if y'all can hear the fireworks that are happening in my neighborhood right now, but if you hear the pops and stuff, just know that it's fireworks, and or gunshots, either way, but not like malicious gunshots, just people having fun with their guns, essentially. So just, it is the 3rd, tomorrow's the 4th, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it is, for sure.
You mentioned fatigue, and I want to talk about the nature of trauma work, because I know that that can lead to compassion fatigue and burnout. So how can first responders and trauma therapists recognize signs of burnout, and what can they do to prevent it, if that's different from everything that we've been talking about already? But what are some of the signs to watch for burnout?
I think avoidance of knowing it's Sunday night and you're going like, oh, geez, I've got to go to work tomorrow. That you're having that sense of dread. Maybe you've got a report to do, but you're avoiding doing it. That you don't have, like, you're avoiding things that you used to like to do for sure. That you're really, like I said earlier, your cognitions that were really positive and really uplifting, and they're really now turning negative. So I think when you start noticing a negative shift in your thoughts and your feelings, you need to be very aware of that. Something is giving you a message that things are turning for you. Whoops. Are you still there?
I'm still here. Hold on.
Okay. That's okay.
Something turned my camera off. Let's see.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, hopefully I'm back.
Yeah, you're back.
All right,
just
good.
On me, that was kind of scary, like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
So
nope, still here.
I think when you start noticing and you're more irritable and you become more negative. So with your thoughts, your feelings, your interactions, your motivation is really, really down, not just at work related, but kind of everything in life. Like things are not feeling good, and that you don't care anymore. I think that's it. Where you used to care, you don't care, you feel apathetic. So I think those would be good indicators for sure.
Yeah, just watching for those. And again, that goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with the self-check-in and just making sure that you are keeping track of yourself. And then if you notice it in your loved one, that you're bringing it up in a kind and compassionate way.
Exactly, right? Yeah, and having that conversation with your loved one, like, hey, my job can be quite challenging. If I'm not myself, kind of do a check-in with me, like, hey, what's going on with you? So I think instead of letting things drift, I think it's when we let things drift, then it becomes a harder issue to manage and to get reset, if that makes any sense, and I think, so much even about suicide and everything like that, when people are feeling, that hopelessness and that helplessness and depression, we really need to ask people those questions too, right? Like where they are and how they are doing, because I think that's really important. And not to assume that even though people have a smile on their face, that they're doing okay inside. So I think that's an important to note.
Yeah, you can mask a lot with a smile. That's for sure.
Yeah.
They are going crazy out there.
I can hear that.
Absolutely insane. That's okay. We're gonna push forward. Are there any resources or exercises that you feel that everyone who has experienced or witnessed trauma could benefit from?
I would don't hold it in. Go and talk to somebody at work. Sometimes they do debriefings, but sometimes debriefings, not everybody is feeling safe to debrief. So to find someone that they can connect with, a buddy or whatever, or somebody, with health and wellness or something, I think that's really important. Not to hold it in, because it can become cumulative. And, then it becomes nightmares, or it can be the numbing, or not to hold it in is what I would be saying for sure. Sometimes our body and our brain can naturally process it out on its own through sleep, through REM sleep or whatever. But quite often with trauma, it's too big and the frontal cortex can't process it out on its own. So I would say to talk about it, debrief about it. And maybe not in groups, because sometimes I do debriefings, and I'll say, so what was that like for you to do that? Colleen, I didn't share anything because I didn't want to be seen like I wasn't a tough guy. So I think one-on-ones are really important, because we all have our own sensitivities. We all have our own perceptions and experiences of each event that will be different from other people's events. So I think that's really important to do, that is to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And that you can process an event quickly. Why hold on to it for over 6 months to see if it's going to turn into PTSD or whatever, right? So yeah, get it out. Sure.
Yeah. What message or words of encouragement do you have for first responders and trauma therapists who may be struggling with the toll of trauma?
Go find someone that you find who is trauma informed, that uses evidence-based trauma therapies. Just talking about it might make you feel better, but with trauma, you need to have exposure component to process it, to put it into long-term memory. So check who you're seeing. So to me, that's really important. Is, when I meet with someone, I do a consultation where I will talk about my work for them to check me out. And I'm also asking them questions, right? Don't assume that you have to work with this first person that you see. Make sure it's a good fit, and to ask their background in trauma. Ask about, what's your experience working with first responders? Because you need to know a first responder has different experiences and different exposures than quite often a civilian will. So to me, that would be an important question to ask. So what is your experience working with first responders? What are the evidence-based exposure therapies that you're trained in? What's your success rate? So I would be going through an interview process.
Yeah. I think that that's a great way to put it too, because whenever you're looking for a therapist or you're looking for a new therapist, it is an interview on both sides, right? I mean, you fill out all this paperwork for your therapist to go, at least in the US, to get through all the insurance and stuff. And then you have to have questions for your therapist. You can't just assume, okay, well, this is the one that's covered by my insurance. Like, hopefully there's more than one covered by your insurance, and you can find someone who really fits with you. I've talked about it before, but my first experience with a therapist was absolutely terrible. And I thought that's how all therapy was. And it's not. I was not a good fit with her, and she was not a good fit with me. So.
And that's a critical component, right? Because at the end of the day, it is all about you. And you have to feel safe. And that, because when you're working with trauma, you are going to be going to places of absolute courage and bravery to share, and vulnerability to share this. So you have to feel safe and secure and held in that process.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, it is time for the magic moment of the stream. And I have a great little tool for us here. I have a magic wand. So if you could wave a magic wand and eliminate one common opinion, misconception, or theory surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health, what would it be?
That let's change it from mental health to mental wellness, health and wellness, and that we're all human beings, and that we can heal with trauma. And we have to change a paradigm shift about how we see trauma and how we're treating with evidence-based trauma therapies, and give the support and resources and come from a trauma-informed lens of practice.
Absolutely. I think that shift would be absolutely lovely.
And, John Lennon's Imagine.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I love the messaging in that. For sure. Well, folks, you know that means the magic moment is kind of the end, signifies sort of the end of our conversation here. So if you have any additional questions for Colleen, go ahead and pop them into the chat and we'll get those covered. I am going to post Colleen's socials one more time. So website, book, LinkedIn, those are all going to be in the chat right now. And Colleen, I'll just open it to you and say if there's anything we didn't talk about or cover or anything you want to bring up, there anything cool you're working on or anything like that, I'll just turn it over to you for a little bit.
Yeah, well, what can I say? I'm looking out the window here in the magnificent Rocky Mountains, practicing my health and wellness. There's grizzly bears up where I am, which are magnificent, huge beings that I won't get too close to, but I'm sure we might see some. Horseback riding tomorrow. Oh. What I'm working on is maybe another book, right? Maybe, continuing doing my trainings with accelerated resolution therapy, public speaking, sharing a message. I'm nominated for International Women of Inspiration Award in November.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that's huge. Yeah, so that's cool. I did a huge book launch in Calgary, and that was really fun and exciting. So yeah, I think living each moment the best that you can.
That's wonderful.
And having fun.
Yep.
Passion. Yeah, that's my message. Yeah.
Is it Women of Influence Canada? Is that what you're nominated for?
Yeah. Well,
that's so cool.
It's the international. It's the international one.
It's, the international one. Oh, okay. Let's see.
Yeah, it's an international. Yeah. So anyhow, that's exciting. So
that is exciting.
I know, right? Women of Inspiration. So, and I think it's one of those things, just do your work and keep your head just, and just see what comes with everything that you do.
Yep.
So I think having your purpose and your passion, and that's what first responders are about too. And I think as human beings, we all have a purpose.
Absolutely.
And passion. Yeah.
Well, Bitemark says, thank you so much for being here. I have some follow-up research to do. I learned a lot, and I'm so glad we were able to spend so much time kind of together. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Colleen. I really appreciate it. All right, chat, give me just a minute. I'm going to disconnect with Colleen offline, and I'll be back playing some games here in just a minute. So give me just a couple of minutes here. And thanks again, Colleen.
You bet.
I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our guest, Colleen Clark, for sharing her expertise and shedding light on the important topics of trauma therapy, mental wellness, and the challenges faced by first responders. Her passion and dedication truly shined through in our conversation, and I hope our conversation resonates with folks who are out there listening today. Remember that taking care of your mental health is essential, and seeking support when needed is a sign of strength, not weakness. If you or someone you know is struggling, don't hesitate to reach out for help. Before we say goodbye, I want to remind you all to check out the resources and links provided by Colleen on our podcast website, tacosfallapart.com. These valuable tools can offer guidance and support for those navigating trauma, whether you are a first responder, a trauma therapist, or simply someone seeking to learn more and support a first responder or trauma therapist in your life. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable, please consider sharing it with friends, family, or colleagues. Your support and just sharing it with folks that you know who could enjoy this conversation really helps me spread awareness and break down the stigma surrounding mental health. As always, stay connected with me on social media to receive updates on upcoming episodes, guests, and other insightful content. I am MommaFoxFire everywhere, from Twitter to Twitch to TikTok and over to Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn and Discord. Thank you for joining me today. Remember that even in the midst of challenges, there is strength, resilience, and a community that cares. Even tacos fall apart, and we still love them, just like I still love you. Until next time, take care, be kind to yourself, and let's keep the conversation going.